I don't know what happened tomorrow, only Allah knows. I give my best, and that's all what I can do. I'm always excited for fighting.
At Brave, he came undefeated. He stands undefeated. Being a German-Moroccan icon, he showed what he can bring along to the cage. He showed why the hype is real, showed what he is at heart, and what he is capable of.
I don't think that I had the choice to become a fighter or not. I had to fight. And I always represent my country, Morocco. I enter the fight with the Moroccan flag. And that's what let the Moroccan people feel like they go inside the cage and fight by themselves, and therefore they support us always. I want to thank the King of Morocco, Mohammed VI, for his support, and all the Moroccan people.
It's good to finally be able to see you and talk to you for the first time.
No, you as well. Apparently I was muted for that whole intro. So we're here for the Brave 14 preview. And this is Nolan King. He's joined us today. Yes, I reached out to you on Twitter, and you were very gracious to give us some of your time today. And so I'm excited to jump in for this Brave 14 card. And to be honest, I have never caught Brave before, but they have caught my eye recently. They recently did that global expansion press conference. I heard that they were going to be the first big promotion, you might say, to go to Morocco there in Africa, and they are going many places. I'm excited to watch this promotion.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And certainly, I'm not trying to make a shameless plug here, but it being on Flow Combat, I think does make it a little bit easier for the fans in America to be able to watch it. This is the debut event that's going to be on Flow Combat, and I think that they, Brave, like you said, global expansion. This is a big event for them, and I think they went balls to the wall with making it. There's a lot of notable names, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, shortly.
Oh yes, yeah, man. What I had known at a Brave was not very much. I'm glad that it's on Flow. You can also catch it on their mobile app wherever you are throughout the world. They just launched that, so if you're not in any of the countries where they already have a deal, apparently they just got an app just like one, so you'll be able to catch it just like everyone else. And man, what I know about this is the co-main event was rumored to be the main event for quite some time. Jeremy Kennedy, the prospect who lost to Alexander Volkanovski, who turns out is pretty darn good in the UFC, was 3-1 in the UFC. They let him go, though. He said, you know what, I'll take this opportunity to go fight somewhere else, get some more experience under my belt, and he's making his debut over at Brave.
Yeah, man, he's an awesome fighter. He's one of the few guys that the UFC, for whatever reason, has cut, even though, their wins far outweighed their losses. I mean, even if 3-1's a great record, and for your only loss during your UFC tenure to beat Alexander Volkanovski, that clearly doesn't warrant a release. I'm not sure exactly what happened with them. I think, from my understanding, from what Kennedy said, I think in an interview I was watching with James Lynch, another Flow Combat guy, got to give a shout out to him. He was saying that the UFC was actually the ones that wanted to part ways with him. It wasn't like, he was shopping around and he decided to go to Brave. So it's kind of an unusual circumstance. Another thing that I had heard was they were going to give him a new contract, and they ended up the UFC ended up pulling out at the last second. So don't know what's going on there, but it was kind of a weird move. And, he fell right into Brave's lap. He's a perfect fighter. He's legitimate. He's promotable. And, he's a guy that hasn't even reached his prime yet. So win-win-win for Brave.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know why you would cut a guy like that. Maybe at lightweight or welterweight, you see how hard it is to get into those divisions. But at featherweight, it makes no sense. But man, it's pretty awesome to jump over to these other promotions where you can become the limelight. You can get all of the star power and just build your brand in general. And as far as this goes, these guys are going worldwide. So this seems kind of like a win-win here. But last minute, what had happened is, I guess their main man from Morocco, Ottman Azaitar, finally decided to get on the card. I don't know if it was negotiations that were going on, if they had trouble finding him an opponent, but he gets added at the last minute, and he is the main man from the hometown, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I was a little surprised when he popped up on this card as well. I thought Kennedy was going to be their selling point, but being from Morocco, Ottman Azaitar, he's a guy that they can throw in there really against anyone, and he'll get those people excited. Everybody loves the hometown fighter, especially when he's as talented as Azaitar is. He's 10-0. Not much else to really say about him other than that. It's a guy to watch. I wouldn't be surprised. Brave hasn't had a ton of events yet in their history. This is only their 14th card. So it's kind of hard to tell what kind of relationship they'll have with fighters going to the UFC. Some of these other promotions like WSOF, now PFL, like we've seen when the WSOF was in existence, there were champions that made the jump to the UFC. Obviously there's those smaller promotions, the regional promotions like LFA, CES, that those guys go to the UFC. But it will be interesting to see, what the frequency of a Brave fighter going to the UFC is. I think we'll start to see that more as time, as there's more and more events. So we really haven't seen, I think there's only been one fighter that I can recall that has gone from Brave to the UFC, and that was Kennedy Nchukwu, who was just signed off of Contender Series. So we'll see if more follow, but I'm assuming Azaitar at some point, unless, I'm guessing fighting in your backyard's not the worst thing, but I wouldn't be shocked if he wants to go to the UFC at some point. And he's certainly on his way. Maybe with another win or two, he'll get there.
Oh, man. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. He's got that undefeated record. The UFC loves that. He is at welterweight. It's a crazy hard division to get into, as we've seen throughout the years, but we'll definitely see what goes on there. He takes on a guy. I was reading your preview on Corica, or however you pronounce his name, and apparently he started off his record pretty shaky, like 7-12 or so, and has won 9 out of his last 10.
Yeah, man, he's been on a roll. I mean, it's funny how that happens with some of these guys. MMA is a weird sport because there's sometimes, most times I would say age when you're getting up there, and you're especially in fight years when you're getting up there, things don't necessarily turn out favorably for you. But for some reason, there's these guys that are just like the I don't know what you call him, just like an exception to the rule where, he's only 28 years old, but he's had 30 fights, and he's arguably at the best point that he's been in his career. Like I said in the article, he's won 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 11 or whatever. And, I don't know what he did, if he made a change in training or whatever, but it seems to be working for him. And I think that this fight's a lot better than it looks even on paper, just because of the fact that, this isn't your typical 16-14 fighter, your typical 500 fighter. This guy over the last, 12 fights or so, he'd be a 10-2 fighter. So, 10-2 versus 10-0, that's a good main event, in terms of recent memory. And I'm super stoked for it, man.
Oh, yeah. And shout-outs to everyone that's jumping into the chat there. Henry Ford, BLT, Stewie, and Steve Sparks jumps in. He said Kakawara had a 6-fight losing streak at one time. So he kind of like Mark Hunt went on a bad skid. But, he's got that prowess, and these guys can pull out of it. Someone that comes to mind is Anthony Smith right now. His record was pretty crappy at one point in time.
Yeah.
And now look at him clamoring to try and fill in Brazil. but we're getting a little off topic with that.
No, you're spot on with that one.
Yeah. Just to hit the hammer there, I think they're going to go with Thiago Santos, though. He's actually a Brazilian, and that makes a lot more sense for Sao Paulo.
Yeah, big time, man. I think that's a perfect fight.
Yeah, I believe Ariel tweeted that that's what it's looking like it's going to be. So
Yeah.
this is a great main event. Unlike the UFC, this will only be 3 5-minute rounds. So just keep that in mind. Oh, and Nolan, do you know anything? Do these guys follow the unified rules, or do they go more the international rules?
That's actually a really good question, man. I've to be honest with you, I've not watched a ton of Brave before this. I think I've seen 3 of their cards. I was looking through their history. I watched 3 of them live. But honestly, that's a good question. I'll have to go back and think. I think, they're not under unified necessarily just because they're not here in the States. But I think that it's not going to deviate too far from the UFC. I'm trying to remember if there's up kicks and stuff like that, but I'll have to look into that more. I don't think that there are. I think that it is kind of closer to the US style, but I'll have to double check on that.
Yeah, well, I do love that about international. You never know what you're gonna get. One day one day MMA, you'll have a unified rules. We're young. One day though. And man, so jumping into Jeremy Kennedy, like I said, I believe this guy had to travel down to Australia on that 221 card, it might have been, and face Alexander Volkanovski. 2 prospects going at it. It turns out Volkanovski's like a mini Habib at 145's. His ceiling, who knows what it's going to be. And yeah, they let Kennedy go, but now he gets to make himself into a star over here, taking on Daniel Polio. Tell us about this Italian.
Yeah, man, the Italians are on the come up. I don't know what it is, but I felt like there was no Italians in the UFC for whatever reason. You look at some other European countries that aren't too far away. You look at the UK, you look at Ireland, and they've had these influxes where all of a sudden they have all these fighters, all these kids that are growing up seeing the UFC, and they have just like a burst of talent. Sweden, but Italy for whatever reason was pretty the UFC doesn't go there. Bellator, smart move on their part. They started going there. I think that's smart. But honestly, they didn't really ever produce talent. And now, after in the last couple of years, we've had a handful of guys go to the UFC. We've had a handful of guys go to Bellator to fight on the Bellator main cards, the bigger fights for them. So I'm sure that people. Is another guy that's coming to prove that try to put Italy on the map a little bit. So I'm excited to see what he has, can bring to the cage. He's sitting at 10-1-2 right now, which is a great record. He's 30 years old. He's been fighting for over, I think, 10 years or so. So he's a guy that has experience, and he's probably coming into his prime, just judging by his age and the amount of fights that he's had and his record. So I think this is a good matchup. It's not like they're giving Kennedy some softball right off the bat that you can say, oh, this guy's 12-8 and he's a journeyman and he fought, he's lost 2 in a row. Like, they're giving him somebody that at least is another interesting, exciting prospect, and somebody that we don't think has, like Kennedy, just from looking at his record, I don't think that he's hit his potential ceiling yet. So I think it's a great fight, especially for a co-main event, a day card. I can't complain about this one, man, at all.
No, not at all. I guess the only complaint is there's so many things to watch at once with WCFA, and then Tyson Fury's going to be boxing that morning, plus Brave. So too much fights is our only complaint, which I don't even think that's real. That's just grasping for straws.
It's only real when they're all on the same time. That's why I love PFL so much. I think that their model from WSOF, that's just killer that they do it on Thursdays. I mean, they used to go head-to-head sometimes with both Bellator and the UFC in the same night. That's when there's too much MMA, when I can't watch it all. That's when there's too much. But, as long as things are staggered, I'm always happy. But I'm going to have the split screen going. I'll have a few things going on Saturday morning. We'll make it work.
Oh, yes. And you raise a great point, man. If these guys can pick a day of the week and really solidify themselves – we all love MMA during the week. PFL's doing awesome. If Bellator would just steal Friday, or LFA and CS still go as well, but they're kind of more. We understand what they are, and then UFC on Saturday would make a lot of sense. But we don't need 52 weeks of UFC. We don't need that.
Correct. Yeah. Saturday morning slot, Brave. Keep it up. That's where I like it.
Heck yeah. Along with all the Russian cards too. Friday, Saturday. Keep doing it.
Yep.
Well, then jumping down the card, another welterweight bout. Abduragimov. Man, these names are terrible. 7-0, taking on Sidney Wheeler, who's from the USA, fighting out of Tennessee. What do you know about these guys?
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, Abduragimov, I believe his name is. He's another undefeated Russian fighter. I feel like if you look at PFL, if you look at Bellator, even the UFC does an okay job at it. They're really starting to pick up some of these solid Russian prospects that we've never heard. We have trouble pronouncing their names. We might have trouble differentiating between who's who, but they always come to. It seems that region of the world always comes and brings it, and they're really turning into. Somebody said to me the other day, if you're watching a fight and you've never seen it before, or you've never seen either fighter before, and you bet on the Dagestani fighter, chances are that you'll win more times than not. And I think that's so true. These guys are just absolutely taking over the MMA world. So I've never seen. I was watching a little bit of tape on him the other night, but I've never seen Abdul fight before, which is part of the excitement for me. I mean, looking at his record, he's fought some guys with some serious experience, and he's done well against them. So I'm excited for him. Mm-hmm. Standing across the cage from him, Sidney Wheeler is the guy that was rumored to be on Contender Series. I believe one outlet reported that he was going to be on. I don't know if he was offered the slot and turned it down or whatever, but there's at least some talks that he was going to be on Contender Series, and that didn't pan out for whatever reason. But he's the guy that fought for Brave in the past, and I think that this is a good matchup for both fighters in this one.
Definitely. And this Russian is only 23 years old. They might all look 35 or something, but he's only 23. Holy crap.
Yep.
And man, yeah, like you said, I think his name is like Azarov. He's the guy who's filling in on the Bellator welterweight tournament. He's going to face Lorenz Larkin. Yeah, he's undefeated, and then all the guys over at PFL that you've seen, and the UFC recently just got one of the Fight or Die brothers. Oh, I forget his name. He just got to change an opponent. Jocko had to pull out, and then
Yandev.
Yes, Yandev.
Adam Yandev. Yeah.
He's coming off of like 3 years not fighting, and then Alexei Konchenko, the welterweight champion from M1 coming over.
Yeah.
And then they got a bunch of Fight Nights Global guys, too, with Nikita Krylov coming over. Man, that's going to be a stat card. I'm excited for that. All of the Russians. It seems like a while ago, the floodgates just got opened. And it might have been before Khabib, but Khabib really took it and ran with it, man, because it's just blown up since then.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm thrilled for that Moscow card. I think the environment's going to be really interesting. I honestly think the UFC, if you look at PFL, I think PFL is a better representation of how much talent there is in Russia. I mean, the UFC's obviously has some top fighters like Khabib and everything, but I think people don't understand how deep the Russian list of talent goes. I think we're going to start to see that more and more coming forward. ACB is cutting back on their events. I think that will open up some more slots for the UFC to pick up fighters, but it just seems like that, these guys are just ruthless. I mean, their fighting style is so fun to watch, and people to me, I saw somebody saying something about Khabib not being a draw or something, which or globally not being a draw. If you look at the amount of Twitter's not a good representation of how popular MMA is in Russia because Russians don't use Twitter. But if you go to Instagram and stuff, some of these guys that we think of as being, middle of the pack or a little bit above or a little bit below middle of the pack UFC fighters absolutely kill it on social media on mediums like Instagram. And I think they use something called VK, which is another kind of like Facebook type thing. Mm-hmm. But if you look at a guy like Zubaira Tukagov, he's got over 1 million followers on Instagram. I think this environment at the Moscow card, not trying to get too far away from what we're talking about, but I just think the excitement for Russian MMA is really coming to fruition. And I think in the next year or so, it's going to become obvious to the American audiences how popular it is there and how many good fighters they have coming out of it.
We can talk about this all day. International MMA
absolutely.
Is my topic. I totally agree. Anyone saying that Khabib's not a draw, they're not paying attention. They're really, really not paying attention because he's got the people in his palms over there when he shows up to the airports and shit. To be honest, man, he speaks English. He's freaking hilarious. His delivery, I don't know. I heard, who was it? Maybe it was RJ Clifford or someone that was out at Calgary, and they were talking about Khabib doing the freaking Q&A that he did, and he's like, Khabib killed it out there, man.
Yeah, he's talented, man. I think that ever since he cut that promo on Conor McGregor at UFC 205, the Alvarez McGregor card, I thought that it's become obvious that his mic skills are really good, and he like you said, he's funny, crosses over multiple nationalities and multiple cultures, and he's still so popular. I mean, he's got people watching his fights in movie theaters in Russia, and like you said, like the airport's being filled up. So I think he's if you're saying that he's not a star, I think your standard of a star is a little too high, almost unachievable. I mean, not everybody can be Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, or Brock Lesnar, but I think Khabib, it's just again, he's just tipping this is just the tip of the iceberg of the Russian MMA and how popular it is in Russia and how popular it's going to get here.
Yes. It's going to be exciting to see what happens. I mean, now that UFC's partnered with M1, they might be able to get a decent TV deal and all this stuff, because I heard that their negotiations for that were just terrible, and no Russian is ever going to pay for a pay-per-view. I think the UFC understands that. But, man, it's not all about just kids selling pay-per-views. You got one expanding, getting like 1 billion people as their market that they get to work with. In Russia, what? Habib says 150 million. So I'd be happy to have them as fans.
Oh, hell yeah, man. I think, if you look at a map, there's a big gaping hole in terms of an area that the UFC hasn't been before that has this amount of people, this population density and everything else. So I think it's going to be a good one. It's going to snowball, and it's going to start a good chain reaction of MMA cards in Russia or Russian fighters coming to the US. I think it's going to be great for the sport.
Heck yes, and anyone who's subscribed to Fight Pass, we are going to get great pacing on an amazing card. Tune in for that shit, man. But going down here, there's a ton of guys with great records coming up. We got 4-0 Russian taking on 20-6, and Sean Salatilla. And there's a lot of lightweight fighters on this card. These guys are flyweights.
Yeah, Sean Santella is a guy that was signed to the UFC, but he never made his debut. He was signed back in, I think it was like 2014 or 20. Let me see, I'm looking it up here. 2016, he was signed for UFC 201, but he couldn't get his medicals done in time, so they ended up cutting him. And since that time, the only loss that he's had was on Dana White looking for a fight when they signed Team Alpha Male's Joseph Morales. He was winning the fight, ended up losing. He got knocked out in the second round, but since that time, he's just held his spot as one of the best flyweights in the United States, and he's getting a little bit up there in terms of age. He's 33. That's kind of on the verge of being too old for the UFC to sign him. So I think this fight, he's made it apparent that he hopes his fight being internationally televised or internationally streamed will bring him to that next level. So expect him to come out guns a-blazing. He's fighting an undefeated Russian, and I think it's a good matchup. I think having another undefeated guy as a win on your record, if he does go out there and win, definitely helps his case to make it to the UFC.
Definitely, man. And I'll be honest, one of the guys on this card that's really got my eye is Keith Lee. He's only 3-2, but the brother of Kevin Lee. I just watched an interview with him with your man James, and he talks just like Kevin. It's insane.
Yeah. And he's talented. I mean, he lost his pro debut, which some people were saying maybe he was a little bit, too young in the sport. I mean, he's only 21 years old right now, and he debuted over a year and a half ago for TKO up in Canada, which is a very good promotion. And he ended up losing that fight. He won 3 more, and then he fought John Sweeney, who is another top prospect from. I think Sweeney was Carolinas or somewhere down Georgia. I think it was South Carolina. And Lee ended up losing a very close split decision that a lot of people found to be controversial for 864 Fighting Championship. That was back in March. So I think even though he's 3-2, it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And the more that he fights, the better his record will get over time. And I think that people will start to see that this 21-year-old kid could turn into something good, even though he's sitting at a 600 record right now.
Oh, man, and has he always been a bantamweight? Because I see this fight is taking place at bantamweight.
I know his last fight against Sweeney was at bantamweight. It looks like all of his fights for TKO were also at bantamweight. So He actually had one flyweight fight as well. So that'll be interesting. 2 flyweight fights. So that would be interesting if he could bump down to there, once he gets his feet under him at 135.
Mm-hmm. Man, you mentioned Scintilla, who was 33, and he's kind of getting up there. I just heard a conversation, and they were talking about how weight cutting makes such an effect on your body. And these younger guys, you can't see them continue that long into their career. And I don't know. I just think about the heavyweight division. All these guys are like 45 years old, still going
Yeah.
at it because they never cut weight. And I was like, man, maybe there's really something to that. And so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's quite possible, man. The heavyweight division, it's like a mystery to me. I fundamentally just don't understand it. People would always, before I started when I started doing writing for MMA Today and Flow Combat, I stopped my betting and everything. All my bets are just in my head, of who I think is going to win or my pick'ems or whatever. But, I used to always stay away from heavyweight fights when I would bet because I think that it's just so unpredictable. You got, a guy that's coming off 3 losses who's 40 years old and he ends up knocking out, a heavyweight that's 4-0, that's 23 years old. I mean, there's just no rhythm to it. It's so random, and expect the unexpected at the heavyweight division. So maybe weight cutting does have something to do with that. Maybe it, evens the playing field a little bit and makes age more of a number than it actually, having any bearing on the fighter's ability. So that's a good point, man. That's something that I think that is I can't necessarily speak to its validity, but in theory, it sounds pretty good because these heavyweight guys, like you said, are getting up there in age and they're still kicking ass.
Totally. And then the next thing you know, they'll go out there and put on the most boring freaking decisions you've ever seen. You thought it'd never be possible, and the heavyweights will do it for you, man. So
it's like Russian roulette watching a heavyweight fight. You either get something completely awesome or something that, you kind of halfway through the second round and you're just kind of wanting it to just stop. So I always have a soft spot in my heart for heavyweights. I don't know what it is. Just, you always hear people that, if you're not educated with the sport, the heavyweight championship of the world, that sounds like a big deal. And it sounds like these guys are the most badass. So I've always had like a special place in my heart for heavyweight fights. And, I try to omit the ones that get a little messy from my head. I just try to think about those big knockouts and hope for that every time I see a heavyweight fight popping up on a card that I'm watching.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the numbers don't lie. The heavier you are, the less chance it has to go to a decision. I've
absolutely.
seen the stats. Well, is there anyone else you want to spotlight on this card before we end this little preview here?
Sure. The only other fighter I could speak about a little bit in depth, like I said, when I was writing my preview, I watched some tape here and there. It seems like there's a lot of exciting matchups, but one other notable name is actually kicking off the night. Jamil Chan. He's a fighter that fought for Bellator a few times. He fought on a couple Bellator main cards, I believe. Fought Derek Campos. He's a very exciting fighter. Kind of doesn't necessarily have the most regard for his own safety in the fights. Kind of just likes to punch. He's a very fun fighter to watch. I believe actually too. Similarly to John Howard, who fought last night on Pro Fight League. I believe that Jamil Chan was diagnosed with autism, which is kind of interesting as well. So kind of a little backstory on him. So I think he's a fighter to watch. He's still only 28. I think he tried out for the Ultimate Fighter at one point, the McGregor versus Faber season. I think he fought to get in the house, but he didn't make it. He lost to Marcin Vorjak on that season. He had the 3 fights for Bellator, and now he's fighting for Brave. So he's a guy maybe that could end up rebounding, getting some more experience outside of a big promotion, and then getting back to it. So that's really the other fighter I'd make a point to say, check this guy out, try to jog your memory of maybe where you've seen him before.
Oh, nice. And that flag, he's fighting out of France? Is that what I see?
Fighting out of France, it looks like, and he also it looks like I think he was German. No, he's from the Netherlands. He's fighting out of Belgium, is where he's fighting out of. Okay. So he looks like he's been all over the world.
Man, well, that's awesome. We got something to kick off the card with that'll be nice and exciting. And Steve Sparks says in the chat, Chan's opponent's only loss is to Ottman at 172, and this is going to be a lightweight fight. So, yeah. Awesome. Good to see that. And then one more note I do want to put on, Ikram Aliskirov, his opponent pulled out, and so he's got a change of opponent. So if you're looking at the poster and you think you're looking at who he's fighting, that might not be accurate. I do know that they had to make a last-minute change there.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, is he was supposed to fight Diego Gonzalez, right?
Yes, yeah. And
so they changed that, which I noticed on Topology it has not changed. So I also big plug to Topology. I love working for them over with them, so I'll make sure to make that change as soon as I stop talking to you. And if everybody wants to check out Topology's page, it will be all updated, and you can see the full lineup for Brave.
Heck yeah. We definitely appreciate Tapology over here. There's no site that gives you more information just at a click. I want to know what weight class this was in. I want to know if it was a title fight. And Sherdog dicks me around, man, to get to there. And like someone said recently, every time I click on Sherdog, it crashes my PC with all their ads.
I just have trouble using them. A big part for me even before I joined Topology that I struggled with was their mobile site seems sometimes to be just kind of a hassle to deal with. So I have huge respect for Sherdog. I think they were one of the OG MMA websites and have really laid the foundation for anything that I'm going to do going forward. But I do, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a little biased in that I work for them, but I think Topology's database is super, super, in depth and really updated. We have a person pretty much in charge of every region in the world just to manage that region and to watch it and make sure that all the results are put in and everything's accurate and the fighters have accurate information. So I think there's in the next year or so, Topology is going to even blow up more. I think that there's a lot of exciting things in store for everybody come end of 2019. I think things will really be flowing for Topology.
Oh, nice. You know what? I go to their rankings. Their rankings are far superior than like everybody. In my opinion, I hope they do like an old school NCAA thing where they took like the 3 most popular rankings and then had like some sort of computer thing to put in there. That way they can get their correct marketing on or whatever. And I would love to see that, man. Do like USA Today, Tapology, and like Fight Matrix or somebody. I don't know.
That's a good idea. I've had a lot of fighters ask me actually since I joined with them. I'll tweet, if anybody has anything that needs to be changed on Topology, any fighters, team, managers, whatever, just let me know and I'll change it. So I had like a bunch of fighters hit me up asking the same question, which was, why am I not ranked higher or whatever? The regional rankings are actually done by a computer program, by an algorithm. So I think it for the most part is very, very accurate. It does a phenomenal job of kind of sorting things out and making sense of who's been active and who hasn't and who's beaten who and, regional titles and whatever. So super accurate there. And then I believe, I hope I'm not misspeaking here, that the rankings for UFC fighters that were in the UFC, the global rankings, I believe are all fan driven. So if you make an account, you can update your rankings as time goes on. Your divisional rankings, your pound for pound rankings. They even have you can like rank your best knockouts of 2018 or your best knockouts of all time, your best submissions. It goes into a giant database and it's updated every time somebody submits. So I think it's a good system and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here, because what I've heard, I don't know too much about it, is that they have a lot of exciting stuff in store for us in the next year or so.
Yeah, I heard when they did their little revamp and people weren't too pleased with the, one extra click or whatever. We heard, hold on, there's great shit in store. This is one of the steps. Just hold on here.
Yeah. That was like panic mode for a lot of people, but I know that they're working on it and they're really open to feedback too. So if you go on the main page on Topology, there's a link you can send suggestions or messages or corrections. So those 2 guys, Steve and Greg, who run the site, they're super receptive to that type of stuff, and I think they're really, really level-headed people to work with, and in terms of even before I worked with them and it being somebody that would submit stuff, corrections, they were super, super receptive, and they're the right guys for the job. Let's put it that way.
Awesome. Well, if you guys want to check out more, Nolan did an awesome preview over at Flow Combat. I'll make sure to add it into the description down below. Also, Brave put out a Road to Brave 14, pretty much their own type of embedded primetime video. It's like 15 minutes or so. Go check out that nice production quality there. I totally agree. And give Nolan a follow at MMA King_Kings on Twitter. Check them out on MMA-Today, Flow Combat, and like you just said, Topology. Nolan, thank you so much for coming on for the preview today.
Hey, anytime, Dan. I hope this isn't the last time I'll be on, because anytime that you need me to come on, I'll be happy to come talk, whether it be Russian MMA, Moroccan MMA, UFC, everything, man. Anytime you need me, just hit me up.
Awesome, will do. We'll definitely have you back. And for you, ladies and gentlemen, I got one more preview for you. So if you want to stick around, here you go. Until next time, back to you guys. We're out of here.
The international journey of Brave continues. The vision is mixed martial arts as a vehicle to unite nations, to bring people together. We are on the horizon, near horizon of a beautiful, beautiful event.
Wow! The bulldozer charges on. Most exciting round I've seen in a long time.
Overdoing pace on it. And that's
great timing.
And this is it. He rocks him in. Good uppercut.
Can he put him away? The bulldozer.
Slugfest going on here.
We're going to see everything that's right and beautiful about mixed martial arts.
Wow. Right down the middle of Azaitar. Oh. What is happening right now?
Oh my God! That boxing pedigree that we talked about.
This is insane.